Okay, good morning, everyone. I am out in the mainland of Greece, and I found this lovely little meadow, and it reminded me of the story of Persephone. Persephone. We're going to get into Hades today, talk a little bit about Hades, and then Hades features big in the story of Persephone. So we're gonna get into that right now. All right, so Hades. Let's get into this right now. You ready? Hades, Lord of the dead, was a gloomy god of few words. Mortals feared him so much that they did not dare mention his name, for they might attract his attention and he might send for them. Instead of Hades, they called him the Rich One, and indeed rich he was. All the treasures in the ground belonged to him. They also called him the Hospitable One, for in his desolate underground realm, he always had room for another dead soul. Hermes guided the souls of the dead down to the brink of the river Styx, a murky, stagnant river that flowed around the underworld. There, Hermes left them in charge of the ferryman Charon. If they had money to pay for their fare, Charon set them across. If not, he refused to take them, for he was greedy. Those who could not pay had to wander about till they found the pauper's entrance to Hades. Paupers is an old term that means poor person's entrance to Hades. That is why when a man died, his kin put a coin under his tongue. They either put it under the tongue or they put it over the eyes sometimes. Sooner or later, all mortals came to Hades. Once inside his realm, they whirled about forever like dry leaves in a cold autumn wind. Cerberus, the three-headed watchdog of the underworld, stood at the gates. He let the dead souls enter, but once past his gnashing teeth and spiked tail, they could never go out again. Hades lived in a dark and gloomy palace with his ice-cold queen, Persephone. She was beautiful, but as silent and somber as her husband, for she wasn't happy. She had not come to rule the joyless underworld of her own free will. She had been kidnapped by Hades. Now we'll get into the story of that, Persephone's story. Persephone grew up on Olympus, and her gay laughter rang through the brilliant halls. She was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and her mother loved her so dearly she could not bear to have her out of her sight. When Demeter sat on her golden throne, her daughter was always in her lap. When she went down to earth to look after her trees and fields, like the one I'm in right now, she took Persephone. Wherever Persephone danced on her light feet, flowers sprang up. She was so lovely and full of grace that even Hades, who saw so little, noticed her and fell in love with her. He wanted her for his queen, but he knew that her mother would never consent to part with her. So he decided to carry her off. One day, as Persephone ran about in the meadows gathering flowers, she strayed away from her mother and the attending nymphs. Suddenly, the ground split open, and up from the yawning crevice came a dark chariot drawn by black horses. At the reins stood grim Hades. He seized the terrified girl, turned his horses, and plunged back into the ground. A herd of pigs rooting in the meadow tumbled into the cleft, and Persephone's cries for help died out as the ground closed again, as suddenly as it had opened. Up in the field, a little swineherd stood and wept over the pigs he had lost, while Demeter rushed wildly about in the meadow, looking in vain for her daughter, who had vanished without leaving a trace. With the frightened girl in his arms, Hades raced his snorting horses down away from the sunlit world. Down and down they sped on the dark path to his dismal underground palace. He led weeping Persephone in, seated her beside him on a throne of black marble, and decked her with gold and precious stones, but the jewels brought her no joy. She wanted no cold stones. She longed for warm sunshine and flowers and her golden tressed mother. Dead souls crowded out from the cracks and crevices to look at their new queen, while ever more souls came across the Styx, and Persephone watched them drink from a spring under dark poplars. That's a type of tree. It was the spring of Lethe, and those who drank from its waters forgot who they were and what they had done on earth. Ratamanthus, a judge of the dead, dealt out punishment to the souls of great sinners. They were sentenced to suffer forever under the whips of the avenging Erinyes. Heroes were led to the Elysian fields, where they lived happily forever in never failing light. Around the palace of Hades, there was a garden where whispering poplars and weeping willows grew. They had no flowers and bore no fruit, and no birds sang in their branches. There was only one tree in the whole realm of Hades that bore fruit. That was a little pomegranate tree. The gardener of the underworld offered the tempting pomegranates to the queen, but Persephone refused to touch the food of the dead. Wordlessly, she walked through the garden at silent Hades' side, and slowly her heart turned to ice. Above on earth, Demeter ran about searching for her lost daughter, and all nature grieved with her. Flowers wilted, trees lost their leaves, and the fields grew barren and cold. In vain did the plow cut through the icy ground. Nothing could sprout and nothing could grow, while the goddess of the harvest wept. People and animals starved, and the gods begged Demeter again to bless the earth. But she refused to let anything grow until she had found her daughter. Bent with grief, Demeter turned into a gray old woman. She returned to the meadow where Persephone had vanished and asked the sun if he had seen what had happened. But he said no. Dark clouds had hidden his face that day. She wandered around the meadow, and after a while, she met a youth whose name was Triptolemus. He told her that his brother, a swineherd, had seen his pigs disappear into the ground and had heard the frightened screams of a girl. Demeter now understood that Hades had kidnapped her daughter, and her grief turned to anger. She called to Zeus and said that she would never again make the earth green if he did not command Hades to return Persephone. Zeus could not let the world perish, and he sent Hermes down to Hades, bidding him to let Persephone go. Even Hades had to obey the orders of Zeus, and sadly he said farewell to his queen. Joyfully, Persephone leaped to her feet, but as she was leaving with Hermes, a hooting laugh came from the garden. There stood the gardener of Hades, grinning. He pointed to a pomegranate from which a few of the kernels were missing. Persephone, lost in thought, had eaten the seeds, he said. Then dark Hades smiled. He watched Hermes lead Persephone up to the bright world above. He knew that she must return to him, for she had tasted the food of the dead. When Persephone again appeared on earth, Demeter sprang to her feet with a cry of joy and rushed to greet her daughter. No longer was she a sad old woman, but a radiant goddess. Again, she blessed her fields, and the flowers bloomed anew, and the grain ripened. Dear child, she said, never again shall we be parted. Together we shall make all nature bloom. But joy was soon changed to sadness, for Persephone had to admit that she had tasted the food of the dead and must return to Hades. However, Zeus decided that mother and daughter should not be parted forever. He ruled that Persephone had to return to Hades and spend 1 month in the underworld for each seed she had eaten. Every year, when Persephone left her, Demeter grieved. Nothing grew, and there was winter on earth. But as soon as her daughter's light footsteps were heard, the whole earth burst into bloom. Spring had come. As long as mother and daughter were together, the earth was warm and bore fruit. Demeter was a kind goddess. She did not want mankind to starve during the cold months of winter when Persephone was away. She lent her chariot laden with grain to Triptolemus, the youth who had helped her find her lost daughter. She told them to scatter her golden grain over the world and teach men how to sow it in spring and reap it in fall. That means to plant it in spring and then harvest it in fall. And store it away for the long months where, again, the earth was barren and cold. So obviously, that myth, that story of Persephone, explains why the earth goes through seasonal changes. Kind of cool, huh? All right, that's their mythological explanation for seasonal changes on Earth: fall, winter, spring, and summer. All right, and it's nice because it looks like we're starting to end our winter and begin a beautiful spring. All right, guys, have a great day. We'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves. Bye bye.